Hello, fantastic third graders, and we are going to continue our historical journey of ancient Rome. And I thought, well, before we jump back into the building of Rome and moving forward about Roman policies and daily life uh, and everything else that you had questions about for Rome, food and weapons and armor, well, I realized that I sort of jumped ahead a little bit and mentioning names such as Mars and Jupiter and Janus. And you're probably wondering, who are those people? Well, today we're going to find out. We're going to spend a couple days learning all about Roman mythology and exactly who were those people I've been talking about and why are they important. So, if you were wondering about that, here we go. So, first of all, we must talk about the pantheon. It comes from the Greek word meaning every god. Now, I will tell you this, the Romans borrowed a lot from the Greeks. Pretty much every idea from the Greeks. And sure, they made their own as well, but they borrowed a lot, such as, well, the pantheon, for instance, or, well, most of their gods as well. Now, when you talk about the Roman pantheon, you're actually talking about two things. One, this fantastic building that's right behind me in that little picture there. That would be the temple of worship for all the gods, literally all Roman gods. There were about 500 by the end of the Roman Empire. Yeah, 500. Because the Romans were so great at bringing everyone in. When they'd conquer a new land, they'd say, oh, hey, what are your beliefs? Oh, cool. You like those things? Bring them on in. You don't like these gods? That's okay. You've got your own? Fantastic. They can come and join us. And they were very happy to include everyone's beliefs. So, very welcoming, very happy to add more and more and more. So, the pantheon literally means every god. Every single person could go there to worship pretty much anything that they believed. The second word for the meaning of pantheon, or second meaning of the word pantheon, is the entirety of the Roman gods as a group. That encompassing a large group of 500 of them. Are we going to talk about 500? No. We do not have time to talk about 500. We've got time to talk about like 15, if that. So here is a view from the inside of the Pantheon. Couple things to know about the Pantheon, and I could go on forever about the Pantheon. It's incredible. This one is actually the third Pantheon to be built. The very first one was built in 27 BC by Marcus Agrippa, and it burned down because of a fire. So a second one went up, built by the Emperor Domitian, but that was struck by lightning and burned to the ground. So this third one was actually started in 78 AD, or CE, depending on which terminology you want to use. And it was started by the Emperor Trajan and was eventually finished when Emperor Hadrian was in charge. All these names, Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Agrippa, these people we're going to be talking about coming up later. Hadrian and Marcus Agrippa quite a bit, actually. It was finished in 125 AD, and it literally means to honor all of the gods. It was all-encompassing. This dome is actually a huge architectural invention of the Romans. So although they stole a lot of ideas from Greek, they made up their own as well. And actually, the Roman Empire was a plethora of new inventions and ideas. And one of them was the incredible architectural structures that they came up with, such as the arches and domes. This is actually the largest unsupported dome in the world. It has been standing for about 2,000 years, and it is the largest one in the world. It's incredible. Part of that reason is, one, it's made of concrete. Another incredible invention of the Romans, the Romans invented concrete. Now, not like we have concrete today. It's very similar to our type of concrete. Not exact, but stands the test of time. It stands and has been standing for 2,000 years. So, concrete, Romans, nice job. Also, something that's interesting about it is, well, although it was originally a dome and a temple for all the Roman gods, which would be considered pagan gods, um, at the fall of the Roman Empire, it was taken over by the Catholic Church and turned into a Catholic church, which is currently dedicated to St. Mary of the Martyrs, which is why historians believe that's the reason it's still standing and wasn't destroyed at the fall of Rome, because it belonged to the Catholic Church and they were using it, and it didn't represent the pagan gods anymore. Now, inside, there used to be some pretty important statues. There are some cool statues you can see right here and right there and over here and behind my little screen here. Those are some gods. The statues that had been in there that were removed and actually destroyed includes a 12-foot statue of Venus wearing a pearl that was worn by Cleopatra, a 12-foot statue of the god Mars, and a rather large statue of Julius Caesar himself. Another name that we will be learning quite a bit about moving forward. The temple itself, although it wasn't dedicated and used during the Roman times specifically for just worship, Hadrian actually used it to meet with the Senate or the government at the time quite a bit. And he dedicated this building to the original creator of the building. So that front, I don't know if you can see, this front bit right up here, that's all in Latin. That is a dedication to Marcus Agrippa, son of Lucius, 3-time consul, who made this. So he saved that from the original building and put it back up there to make sure it was dedicated to the original constructor of the Pantheon. This is something that Hadrian did a lot. He dedicated buildings to their original architects or the original creators of them. So yeah, Pantheon. One more thing, actually, these giant columns. See how small these people are compared to these giant columns? This is a large building. The Romans did this 2,000 years ago. These giant columns actually came from a quarry in Egypt, ancient Egypt. When the Roman Empire eventually took over that part of Egypt, they had these columns made in the quarry, brought over on barge through the Nile River into the Mediterranean Sea by ships, then to make the huge building itself. Very cool. I could go on and on about the Pantheon, but I digress. We want to talk about the rest of the fantastic mythology that is Rome. So, all these fabulous people sitting right up here, as Rome grew, it started to become influenced by other cultures. Instead of conquering a land and saying, you will listen to us now, the Romans were very, very generous conquerors, I should say, and they brought people in and said, here, come join our lands. What do you believe in? What do you like to do? What's your culture? What kind of food do you like? What kind of celebrations do you like to have? And they incorporated that into Roman culture. So it sort of became like a melting pot. In a way, there's a lot of connections to America with Rome, in that they really let everyone come in and believe what they wanted to believe and worship how they wanted to worship and have the celebrations they all wanted to have. Almost all of Rome's original gods and goddesses came from Latin and Greek pantheons. So as we move forward, we're going to actually have a chance to see all the Roman names and then their Greek counterparts. Who were they originally in Greek? And many of those gods and goddesses kept or retained their Latin names and then used a combination of Latin and Greek powers, abilities, responsibilities, stories. They all just sort of melded together into this big melting pot known as Rome. So, We're going to be talking today about the deconsentes. Deconsentes were the 12 main gods and goddesses of the Roman pantheon. They were originally called the 12 Olympians in Greece. They included Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Vesta, Ceres, Diana, Vulcan, Apollo, Neptunus, Mercurius, Mars, and Venus. Some of those names probably sound familiar to you. Probably that Jupiter, Venus, Mars bit in there. Yep. We have our planets named after the Roman gods. And then Mercurius, bet you can see the word Mercury from there, as well as Neptunus. Neptune, exactly. So all of our planets came from Roman gods. So the Vikings got to name the days of the week. The Romans got to name the planets. Now, speaking of planets, looks like we're missing a few. How about Pluto, Saturn, and Uranus, you say? Well, Pluto we'll get to. He was not part of the most 12 important gods of the pantheon, but he was there, so we'll talk about him. Saturn was originally a Titan, so he was even before the gods, much like the Titans were around before Odin and Freya and Frigg and Thor showed up. There were Titans in Roman and Greek mythology as well, and Saturn was actually the father to Jupiter. And then Uranus is actually, that's his Greek name. His Roman name is Caelus, and he is god of the sky, but not hugely celebrated because once Jupiter showed up, Jupiter pretty much took over the sky god duties, and although Uranus and Caelus were celebrated, they were celebrated on a much smaller scale. So, we will start with our Capitoline Triad. You've probably heard that word Capitoline before, brought it up in the last videos. These were the big three. Woo woo! Big three of Rome. They were Jupiter, Minerva, and Juno. Ladies, two girls representing. All right. These three had statues placed on Capitoline Hill in Rome. Capitol Hill, where the government works. These three were the most honored gods and goddesses, and they were worshipped for their knowledge, their ability to rule fairly, and yet have a very large sense of power. But the specific part about able to rule fairly, rule with knowledge, with a clear head, make decisions for all that are fair and based on fact, and because they were honored for that, and because of that, they had statues placed around the government and on Capitoline Hill to remind those people in government that they needed to do their jobs with a duty, to be fair, to be honorable, and to use their best knowledge that they could. So we'll start with Jupiter, father of the gods. He was master of the gods, Rome's most famous and most popular god. He carried around thunderbolts. Because why not, right? Thunderbolts are awesome. He was god of the skies. An eagle was his animal symbol. And it is said that he was the one to meet with the first kings of Rome, including Romulus, to set down religious rules and rules for governing the city, including having human sacrifices they moved away from human sacrifices and did more animal sacrifices moving on later. And then actually after a while, they stopped that completely because people found new gods to celebrate as well. His Greek version would be known as Zeus. You might have heard of Zeus before, especially if you've ever seen the Disney movie Hercules. Zeus, all powerful. And the Viking version of him would be Odin. So, three very similar gods, three very similar beliefs. They all had different names, and they all kind of showed up at different parts of time, but they all had a lot of similarities. So some more pictures of him. Zeus did not like to wear shirts. It was warm in Rome, I guess. All right, moving on to Juno, the number 2 in the Capitoline Triad. She was the mother of all gods. wife of Jupiter, goddess of marriage, women, and children. Her symbols were a pomegranate, a very tasty fruit, and a peacock, a very colorful bird that you can see in that picture there. The Greek name for her would be Hera, and Viking, she's a combination of Freya and Frigg. So Juno, here she is with her peacock. Very cool statue that still stands of her today. We move on to Minerva. Minerva, out of the three of the Capitoline Triad, Minerva would be my favorite. She was the daughter of Jupiter, and she was actually born from his mind. One day Jupiter had a huge, huge headache. He couldn't figure out what it was, and he sat down and he took a rest, and his headache just got worse and worse and worse. It almost felt like someone was pounding on the inside of his head. And a few hours later, his head opened up, and she burst from his skull, landing on the ground, fully born, fully clothed with her javelin and her shield. And it is said that she was born from his mind, and therefore she is the goddess of quite a lot, including wisdom. She is the goddess of intelligence and wisdom. She is the goddess of schools and education, of commerce, of business, of knowledge, of arts and war. I like how she is the goddess of war. Yes, the Romans have a god of war, but they also have a goddess of war. Yes. Girls are tough in the Roman society. She's also goddess of poetry, medicine, magic, crafts, and weaving. She has a lot of skills, ladies and gentlemen, a lot. Her symbols are a shield, a javelin, and an owl. She is a warlike goddess, though. She absolutely will stand up for what she believes in. She is not one to back down from a fight. She also does not appreciate people thinking that they're better than her, and she will stand up for herself and her beliefs. The Greek version for her is Athena, and the Viking, Biragi, is close, doesn't have an exact match, but pretty close. You'll always see statues of her with her javelin, like a spear, and her shield. This one, she actually is wearing Mars's helmet of war with a chest plate to protect her going into battle. And these are statues all around Rome, or where the Roman Empire used to be. Now, we're going to pause a little bit before we go into the rest of the deconsentes. We've hit our Capitoline Triad, and that's fantastic, but we mustn't forget Janus. Although Janus is not one of the 12, the deconsentes, the 12 top Roman gods, he's actually incredibly important in Roman culture and society. He was the god of beginnings, doorways, and bridges. A doorway in Latin is actually called a Janus. The beginning of each day, month, and year was sacred and devoted to him, because you never knew what a new beginning would bring, and new beginnings happened all the time, and they needed to be celebrated. The month January is named for him. January is our first month of the year. So January 1st was a very important day, but actually January 9th is his official day of celebration. He has two heads. One is always looking forward into the future, and one is looking back into the past. So many different depictions of Janus. This is a Roman coin, a statue, a carving, a printout. Now we're going to continue with a couple more. I think we'll do one more, and then we will finish the rest up tomorrow. So we will do Vesta, and then finish tomorrow with the rest of the gods and goddesses. So Vesta, part of the Deconsentes, she is the goddess of the home, of the hearth, of family. There was an entire priesthood devoted to her, and it was a priesthood of just women. Only women were allowed to be a part of the Vestal women priesthood, and they were devoted to worshiping the goddess and actually did several community service projects for their cities. They lived at the temple of Vesta, but then they were around to help families, bring food to those who were more needy. They did a lot for the local villages that they were a part of. Um, so it was about making sure that the home was taken care of, and that family was always number one. And that's what the College of Vestal Women did, was make sure that families were taken care of. Her symbol is a fire in the fireplace. It makes you feel very warm and safe, and that's what her symbol meant. The Greek version of her is Hestia, and it's very difficult. I could not find a Viking translation for her. Maybe one of you can. I will move my screen. Typically, her symbol, the fire in the fireplace, also on a torch, fire in a torch, or a sconce would represent her. And then families would typically have a small statue of her in their house, sometimes on a mantle, if they had a fireplace on the mantle. And that would be to celebrate her and to remind them that family was most important above all. And she was also on their coins, Roman coins. All right. Well, on that note, we are actually going to stop for today. There's quite a few more to cover, but I don't want our videos to go too long. So we will see you tomorrow for the rest of our Roman gods and goddesses. And I will be back with a fun activity for you as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you on the flip side. See you, college class.